Hey everybody, this is Claire, and this is Small Joyful Things. As always, I go to thrift stores or I go to estate sales, or sometimes I buy things from Craigslist, and I'm always looking for things that I find interesting or that I think you would find interesting. So I bring them home, try and find out as much as I can about them, and then tell you guys about them. So here's what I've got today. We have a butterfly dish. And I bought this in a thrift store for $2. I kind of picked it up just kind of on the look of it because I thought the colors were really interesting, and I thought the actual style of it was really cool as well. And imagine my surprise when I flipped it over and I saw the Beswick mark. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Why are they selling this for only $2? But here we go. It is about 6 3/4 inches, and that's at the widest part there in the wings. And I'm gonna try and it's got about 5.5 inches with the widest point there, and it's about 1 inch high. It's basically a little trinket dish, like really lovely little thing in the shape of the butterfly. I've done the usual thing around my hands, all over the edges, basically looking for chips and cracks. It is in pretty good condition, but you can see there that it has quite a bit of crazing and a little bit of discoloration there. On the underside, you've also got that patch there. I'm not sure what this is, unfortunately. You can see the crazing is a little bit more obvious there. I suspect that it's just some kind of like seeping or damage. Essentially, it's picked up something from the environment that's just gotten into the dish. I have no idea, really. I've tried to clean it and it's definitely not willing to be cleaned. That is just part of it right now. Thankfully, though, it's on the underside. You still obviously get the nice effect here, which is obviously great. Now, the interesting thing about this is that I took a little bit of a journey trying to figure out when it was from. Like, if I just skip over here, that it's the butterfly dish is fairly straightforward. You can see here, if you actually just do a plain Google search for Beswick butterfly dish, you're going to get this. There's actually a few different, there's a few others here as well that also have, like, these ones that look a little bit more like butterflies. And I see them listed as being Beswick, and yeah, I don't know. You can see something else as well, the color variation here between the different pieces that we have. None of the colors here look quite the same as this. And I can't tell if that's just the lighting being different, or whether this just didn't have a standard color to begin with, or if it was just handmade or whatever. So anyway, if this is your first time, Beswick is a very well-known pottery company. So based out of England, from the potteries from Stoke-on-Trent, the famous area in England that basically produced all the best pottery, especially around the turn of the 20th century, and definitely into the early part of the 20th century. Still going today. I don't think they produce as much as they do now. Their heyday was back in the late 19th century, but still quite a lot of really good porcelain being made there. And this is specifically by John Beswick. Now, there is some information here. This is J.W. Beswick, not the same thing. The actual Beswick name went through a few different iterations, and I can actually pull up a little bit of history here. And it started off with J.W. Beswick, and that was up to about 1938, and that was kind of James Wright Beswick. He kind of began the whole thing late 19th century at the Abbey West Longden, moving to a few different places here or whatever. And he went down for a while, and his elder John Beswick, joined his father in the mid-1890s and was associated with the start with one of the works. Basically, after a while, John Beswick, it's like the first John Wright Beswick, James Wright Beswick, they've got two different names here, so who's no. J.W. Beswick died in May 1920. His son became the proprietor, and then he died in 1934. And then essentially the company was run by the estate, essentially, of John Beswick. And that became the name of the company. So Beswick, that we see here, Beswick ware, from my research, specifically this period is after 1938 and before 2002. And the big question is, can we actually nail it down any further than that? I have seen a fair number of these dishes listed as being from the 1930s based on nothing but the mark. And we can see it here. Now, the two things you can see about the mark, the 28, I'm not entirely sure about. That, I think, is possibly possibly the model, like the essentially the form number. And yeah, you know what? I'm actually not sure. That could be the form number, and that could be something else. It's very unclear. The mark there is kind of our most important thing, the way that it's been stamped in. And we've also got, you can just barely make it out, Made in England impressed onto it there. And that's basically it. We don't have any others. So what does the mark actually tell us? And again, a lot of people are saying 1930s. I don't think that's the case. So if we go and take a look at the back stamp information, they're essentially basing they're saying 1930s, and they're basing it on this. The Beswick Ware Made in England printed mark is dates from 1936 onwards. They started using this in the 1930s, and then basically after that they were using it for a while. There are some examples here of the different marks. You can see that just impressed into it, Beswick England, with that stamp, and then the stamp there repeated. Once we start getting up into like the 1960s, then the stamp changes a bit. So we're definitely out of the range we could possibly be in. Once you actually skip back a bit, the Beswick England impressed mark, along with the Beswick Ware Made in England printed mark, the two of them together. Now you can see the impressed mark started from the 1950s, and the Beswick Ware Made in England mark started from the 1930s. So we kind of have two going on here, because we've got Made in England, not specifically Beswick, we've got Made in England, and we have a serial number. Now, there you go, shape number. Okay, well, there you go, shape number. So we're actually, that's a shape. The 28 could actually be referring to the pattern, if that makes sense. So the 594 is the shape of the piece, and the 28 could be the colors. Bit of a guess, but you know. Anyway, so what have we got? Again, Beswick Ware Made in England, they were using it from the 1930s. Is this actually from the 1930s? Now here's the question. What does the serial number have to do with it? And I did some looking here. Beswick Ware Made in England printed mark, it started being used from the 1936 onwards. However, if we go and take a look at, not there. Okay, I don't have, actually, I have the page. I was looking at another article which basically said that Beswick Ware impressed marks, as in the marks that identify the piece itself, like that serial number, they didn't start using those until the 1950s. And that kind of makes some kind of sense when we can see that this one here, the example of the Beswick England impressed mark, started being used in the 1960s, like 1950s as well as the actual printed mark. So I've been kind of thinking that this is going to be correct, that this is going to be from the 1950s, not the 1930s. 1930s is kind of too old. If it just had this mark and nothing else, then yeah, okay, I'd be more comfortable saying it's 1930s, but not in this case. It's got an impressed serial mark there, and it's also got the impressed Made in England there. And although I can't be sure about this, I get the feeling that was only, that on its own is the 1930s, and then they didn't actually start putting in the Made in England or the impressed serial. The serials didn't come to the 1950s. Okay, now, if you remember, I did actually have another video on another Beswick vase that I got, and if I remember correctly, there was no serial number on that. There was just the impressed Beswick mark and like the actual stamp itself, but there was no impressed mark. There was a stamp saying Beswick Ware. There was no actual kind of mark pressed into the clay, if that makes sense. And I know from reading that actually was from the 1930s. Like everything was correct to say that it was from the 1930s, and that was correct, and that was, you know, accurate. But now we've got this with a similar mark, but also with that. So I kind of did, there was a lot of reading involved here. Side note, if you actually do want to look for marks for pottery, do not Google something like Beswick dating marks, okay? The search results you get are going to be awful. And it is, like, even for me, and I kind of know what I'm looking for, there's a lot of rubbish stuff that shows up on the search results, because basically people just kind of dump auto-generated pages trying to get you to just click anything. And if you tap on one of those and it turns out that you essentially get hijacked, it's an actual like web exploit. And I know this because I'm a web developer. It's a hijack that just starts redirecting you through scummy dating sites or something like that. So bear that in mind. If you're going to search for pottery marks, do not use that phrase. Look for something like Beswick pottery marks. Don't specifically use the keyword date or dating. That could be bad. Can say from personal experience, bad. Anyway, it is what it is. I'm going to put some links down in the description if you'd like to know a little bit more for this, the actual company, the company history. I'll also list this as well, the back stamp reference. This I think is very good just for visual reference of the Beswick marks. I'm actually not 100% sure if Beswick has ever been counterfeited. I think in this case it's definitely real just because it's got quite a lot of evidence of age. And the other thing I actually found kind of surprising, usually the potteries.org has a lot of very good information on like any of the pottery companies that would have existed at any point in Stoke-on-Trent, and they've got almost nothing, I'm afraid, on the Beswick works. So unfortunate. But either way, hopefully that's good information, and hopefully it'll tell you guys like something good about Beswick and what I think of it. What exactly is going to happen to this? I will probably list this on Etsy. I think it's a very cute little piece, and I think someone's going to like it a lot, even though it has quite a lot of crazing and it has that discolored patch. It's still a nice little piece of decor from the 1950s. I'm sure that like someone who's essentially going to be into this style is definitely going to like it a lot. So like, we'll see. I'm guessing that I could probably sell it for maybe $10 to $15 plus the cost of shipping. I think something like for that, someone's definitely going to want it. So here we go. This is my small joyful thing for the day, and I hope you guys liked it as well. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.